Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's presentation of the Millennial Producers Academy. I am Victor Payan, the Executive Director of Media Art Santa Ana. Our website is www.masamedia.org. And I'm very excited about today's presentation because we have a producer who lives in Orange County, but she's done some amazing work. One of my favorite documentaries that just came out in the last couple of years, we had the fortune of screening in our festival to full house, people that came from all over the region to see this film, The Rise and Fall of the Brown Buffalo, the story of Oscar Zeta Acosta, the Brown Buffalo activist, lawyer, legend in the Chicano community, but one where nobody could tell his story. People have been wanting to tell his story for 30, 40 years, and no one could get it done. He's a figure that figures prominently in popular culture because he was the Samoan lawyer in Hunter S. Thompson's Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Larger than life character, but no one had been able to tell his story, which is much more complex and complicated and rich than would be let on by that book. His contributions and as an inspiration, as an author, were immense to our community and generation and the Chicano movement. And he ran for sheriff too. So very interesting guy. But she was able to get this film made with producer Philip Rodriguez, and they do an amazing job of telling the story using reenactments and animations and footage and interviews that you really should watch it. We'll be talking about it and showing clips. And that film is available to watch on Kanopy.com, which is a service you get for free with your library card. We strongly advise you to sign up for Kanopy. And we'll also be showing clips from her other film that she produced and wrote, Bridging the Divide, Tom Bradley and the Politics of Race, about Tom Bradley, the first African-American mayor of Los Angeles, very influential figure. And as we go through the recall, both of these figures' experience in making these films will inform how we as people, as citizens, as producers, can get our message out about how to tell the story of the recall and how to encourage people to vote and participate and be active. Because as we know in this democracy, the election is won not only by who votes, but who doesn't vote. And getting people excited and activated are really, really important right now. So that being said, I want to introduce our guest, Alison Sotomayor. Again, very excited to have her here. She'll tell you a bit about her career, which spans public affairs, very influential programs. And I just can't wait to hear what she has to say today on Bridging the Divide with Documentaries. So take it away, Alison.
First of all, thank you very much, Victor, and to Media Art Santa Ana for this wonderful opportunity. I'm honored all of you are here because you can be anywhere in the world right now and you chose to be here. I just want to take a moment to applaud, these emerging producers. Now with the commercialization of public media and partisan congressional politics, and of course, the rising cost of productions, it's really hard to get new voices and perspectives heard. New filmmakers out into the industry and breaking into the industry. It's especially hard for people of color. So I applaud the emerging producers here. It's great to see Latinas here too. We need to see more Latina filmmakers out there. There's not enough. And I'm just really happy and honored to be here. So I will go ahead and just start by introducing very briefly who I am. For the past 30 years, I have worked in both television and as an independent documentary filmmaker, writer, and researcher. Spanning the decade from 1990 to about 2000, I worked on the Emmy Award-winning news and public television series at KCET Los Angeles called Life and Times. There I had the opportunity to interview many thinkers and activists and authors and artists, some of them being Charlton Heston, Walter Cronkite, John Wooden, Andrew Young, John Glenn. My focus there in terms of stories was really the Latino community, but I also really loved covering, our local history, arts, and politics. For the past 20 years, I've been working as an independent documentary filmmaker and producer. I've also had the opportunity during the course of the 20 years to serve as director of communications and film producer for the National Hispanic Media Coalition, which is a media advocacy group fighting for more Latino representation of American Latinos in all forms of media, among other things. I also served as the coalition's film producer for 18 years, from 2001, producing annual short films on its progress for more Latino representation in all media. Okay, so let me get down to, okay. So I like to start basically by, I get one question a lot by emerging producers, and that's basically, you know, how did you get your start? I mean, everybody has a different journey. Everybody has a different story. You know, after graduating from UCLA, I made a decision to become an on-air news reporter. At that time, I knew it was very competitive and challenging to break into, and it still is. And I knew the only thing that I can do, given that I didn't study that particular field in college, was to intern. So I was younger, I had a lot of energy. And so what I ended up doing is a plan that I thought worked out very well. I was crazy at the time, but I did it. I had 3 different jobs at the same time. 2 of them were internships. One was at KCOP, Channel 13 in Los Angeles. The other was at KCAL, KCBS in Los Angeles also. And then the 3rd job, I worked at a post-production house. I mean, just to survive and make money because I needed to survive. So, you know, in working in news, it was really interesting. As a production assistant, I was not happy, you know, with the content and the length of the stories. I wanted more stories about my community. I wanted more inspirational, positive stories about my community, less stories about, you know, us being connected to drugs and gangs and so forth. I also felt very strongly that there were many stories worthy of just being covered in just 1 minute. I mean, how can you just tell a story in that time and be content, you know, as the producer of that story? So at that point in my life, you know, interning at these 2 different news stations, I knew that all I really wanted to do was produce long form content. So I began networking, attending job conferences. I became a member of the California Chicano News Media Association. And at one of their conferences, I met a wonderful woman. She was the head of human resources at KCET, Lou Burgess Nunez. And she was just happened to be looking for an HR assistant. And she asked me while we were talking, you know, if I was interested in the job. And actually that was my big break, really was meeting her, because I ended up taking the job in HR, and I got my foot in the door at a place where I knew was going to be producing thoughtful programming. I mean, the type of program that really interested in me. So I stayed there for about 6 months. At that time, a daily news and public affairs series was just being developed at KCET. It was called Life and Times. And I was hired. I was hired first as an administrative secretary. Then I moved up to researcher, and then eventually associate producer, and then producer. And it ended up working on the show for 10 years. And the point being here that I want to make is that I learned how to produce television. I learned how to be a producer. I learned how to create, you know, engaging, meaningful television at KCET. I didn't learn it at UCLA. You know, people at KCET, they believed in me and they saw potential. So, you know, this really became the first real media job that opened the door for me to begin my career in public affairs programming. And it really resulted in finding my true passion for long-term filmmaking. So since then, I've always felt a great obligation, you know, as a Latina producer and just simply a producer, but a great obligation and responsibilities to tell stories about communities of color and to tell stories about the Latino community. Also to tell just extraordinary stories about extraordinary people, you know, especially about people who have been forgotten, and then of course who have become marginalized. You know, I have really remained committed to telling stories that the mainstream culture got wrong or just decided to neglect. So there comes a great satisfaction when you know you've made a difference in people's hearts and minds through this powerful medium, of documentary filmmaking. Every film is a journey, and every film is definitely a learning experience. And so again, I applaud all of you filmmakers out there who have the desire to step in the trenches, pull up your sleeves, to educate people, to entertain people, and create civil discourse. So congratulations on this step in your careers. I did want to talk about some producing tips that I would like to provide you today. I want to explore that, as well as some of the successes and learning moments that I'd like to share with you. I mean, there's a ton of stuff over 30 years. So many stories, so many lessons learned, but I can only tell so much. And so I'm giving priority to some of these things that I think will be most helpful to you. So let's get started. To do this, I'm going to use two documentaries that I produced that aired on PBS. Victor, thank you for already mentioning those films. They are Bridging the Divide, Tom Bradley, and the Politics of Race, and The Rise and Fall of the Brown Buffalo. Just to give you a kind of context as to kind of the behind the scenes of both of these films. Both projects raised about $1 million each to get done. Both were very multi-layered, multimedia projects. Both had very robust community outreach campaigns, and both had educational curriculum materials created for universities and high school students. So first, I want to focus on Bridging the Divide, Tom Bradley and the Politics of Race, which was released in 2016 and co-produced by my colleague and my friend, Lynn Goldfarb. This film explores, as Victor mentioned earlier, the life and legacy of Tom Bradley. He was LA's mayor for 20 years, from 1973 to 1993. Some of the themes of the film include racial politics, coalition building, police brutality, and police reform. Here's the first 2 minutes of the film, which kind of gives you a really great overview of what to expect in it. Victor, if you can please roll it.
1965, in a predominantly Black neighborhood in Los Angeles, decades of pent-up frustration and anger came to a head over poverty, racism, and police brutality.
Hands up high. Get your left arm higher, Nat. Let's get them up there. First one drops her hands is dead, man.
The city that once shimmered with promise for African Americans exploded in gunfire and flames in the worst racial riot in post-war America.
All we want is jobs. We get jobs, we don't bother nobody. We don't get no jobs, we'll tear up Los Angeles, period. The police will burn them up too.
The Watts riot revealed an America starkly divided by race, even in this era of historic advances in civil rights. And barriers to justice and equality seemed intractable, unless new paths could be forged.
This city is ready, not for a black man, not for a red man, not for a yellow man, not for a white man. It's ready for the best man, and that is Tom Bradley.
In 1973, Tom Bradley, the son of sharecroppers and grandson of a slave, made history. He was elected mayor of Los Angeles, the first African-American mayor in a major American city with an overwhelmingly white majority. His extraordinary multiracial coalition would unite a divided city, rein in a fiercely resistant police department, and transform the national dialogue on race.
Tom Bradley was way ahead of his time because he put together the same kind of majority that elected Barack Obama president, but he did it in '73.
Tom Bradley's story gives us a glimpse of what is possible in America. Coalitions, justice, police reform, and raises the question, what remains to be done to bridge the racial divide?
Great. Thank you, Victor, for that. The second film I want to introduce to you that I also produced was The Rise and Fall of the Brown Buffalo. This documentary explores the very unorthodox life and legacy of Chicano revolutionary attorney and novelist Oscar Zeta Acosta, who was the basis for the character Dr. Gonzo in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, written by his friend and Rolling Stone writer Hunter Thompson. The film is directed by badass veteran PBS filmmaker Philip Rodriguez, who is also a friend of mine, and who has also directed the award-winning documentary Ruben Salazar, Man in the Middle. Victor, if it's possible, can you please roll the trailer of that film? Thank you so much.
Once in every century, there comes a man who was chosen to speak for his people.
I've never met anybody like him.
Oscar was a wild boy.
A Baptist missionary, clarinet player, peach picker, lawyer, leader of the Chicano movement. A brown buffalo.
It is the police department and the sheriff's department that produce a lot of this crime that we hear of.
They felt Oscar was a threat to their leadership.
Oscar had a taste for excess.
Our representatives are not in the government. They're going to keep on killing us. I swear to God, they're going to keep on killing us. They're going to wipe us out.
The tale of Oscar's fall from grace is rife with bad blood and ugly paranoia.
It's always the brown man or the black man or the poor man that does the dirty work. We are the janitors of the world.
Okay, thank you, Victor, for that. So as you can see, you kind of get a sense that this film is innovative and edgy. Philip, the director, really wanted to create an artistic, compelling story about Oscar that was never before seen on PBS. Something that mirrored Oscar's personality and his life in the truest of senses, but at the same time, kind of still illustrating the journalistic vigor, you know, the educational value and the impartiality that PBS is really known for. So for Philip, it was all about the film's aesthetic as a director. You know, he didn't want to do a straightforward PBS traditional documentary with talking heads. He didn't want predictability because Oscar wasn't predictable. You know, he deliberately avoided that approach. And another thing that he really wanted to do was to bring in more younger and new Latinx audiences to PBS with a film that really reflected the sensibilities and style of that group. So what we ended up was this film. It was bold. I mean, we used actors to portray the real people who knew Oscar back then to tell the story. We also dramatized portrayals of Oscar and Hunter Thompson and other key figures, you know, of that era. We didn't hold back on any profanities either, given much of Oscar's, you know, writings included that. And all of this was weaved together into film, you know, that really created creative freedom in the edit, you know, by using innovative graphics, animation, cartoon-like visual sketches, music, and even humor. If you don't mind rolling the next clip on Kanopy, Victor, I would appreciate it. Thank you so much.
I hereby declare my candidacy for the office of Sheriff of Los Angeles County.
Sheriff's Run was a way of raising awareness for the repression and brutality inside LA County Sheriff's Department.
It is the police department and the sheriff's department that produce a lot of this crime that we hear of. They are not a policing agency any longer, but basically to keep people in line.
I hereby pledge myself to the ultimate dissolution of the Sheriff's Department.
Do you think the general public is ready to accept this rather startling revolutionary plan, Mr. Acosta?
As a whole, no, I don't. No, sir.
How do you expect to win?
It's going to be difficult.
The campaign was exciting. He was like, fuck the sheriff. We're going to challenge him.
surprisingly popular campaign for sheriff of Los Angeles County made him a minor hero among the politically hip Chicanos all over the city.
Of all the crazy things I had done, this one beat them all.
Viva Zeta!
Help me change the system and vote for Oscar. My campaign was of broad appeal. No longer was I limited to my own people.
Hey, Zeta! Hey, man! Come here! Hey, this is Liberace!
Mr. Costa, this man tells me you're running for sheriff.
Yes, I am.
Give me a hug. Oh, congratulations. I hope you win.
Aw, thanks, man.
He lost the election by 1 million or so votes.
I think we got 100,000 votes. We only lost by 1 million.
He knew he wasn't going to win, but it was an excellent vehicle for bringing attention to the public issues.
Okay, that's it, Victor. Thank you. Great. So, so my producing role and responsibilities in both this film, the Brown Buffalo film, and the Tom Bradley film were very similar. And of course, I worked closely with the directors at every step of the way to ensure that I, as a producer, delivered what needed to get delivered on time and within budget. You know, with that said, you know, I just really want to stress to the emerging producers here that above and beyond the director, the producers have a really strong say, you know, in the content and storyline, you know, of the film. Like, for example, in the Brown Buffalo film, there was a storyline that almost didn't make it in to the film. And that was the very rocky, tumultuous relationship between Oscar and Socorro, his wife. I mean, we couldn't locate visuals of her to tell a story. I mean, how can you tell a story when you don't have any photographs of her? I searched, I dug, I overturned boxes, made calls, reached out to practically every place that I can think of that she had a connection back in that era. I mean, to really no luck. And as the only Latina producer on the film, I was really hell-bent on locating these visuals, you know, to ensure that not only the film was not male-centric, but that we told Socorro's truth and her side of the story. You know, she was a paralegal with very impressive connections to the Chicano activists and lawmakers. And when she met Oscar, she introduced these people to him, and really the rest was history. So it took about a year for me to finally find a treasure trove of visuals of Socorro by locating her oldest brother in Central California. I had conversations with him. I got to know him. Him and I got to trust one another. And you know, he eventually provided access to the images that we needed to tell her story. So because of that, you know, we had to rewrite the entire film to include Socorro's thread. So, you know, producers have a big say-so in the content and work directly with directors on that. I know I have from my own personal experiences. Producers in television and, you know, in series TV, they have different roles. You know, it's more like overseeing budgets and so forth. But for documentary filmmaking, a producer really does pretty much everything, you know, from the beginning to the end to make sure the entire film is what it's supposed to be and is delivered on time, and all the deliverables are done to the funders and the sponsors, of course. So I wanted to share a success story with you, and really focusing on the Brown Buffalo film as sort of a case study on what a successful and comprehensive community engagement strategy looks like. I mean, this will give you ideas on how to engage people before and after your own premiere of your film. Having a community engagement plan, in my opinion, is super important because funders love this. They tend to gravitate towards this engagement and give money and fund projects that have thoughtful strategies. So you may want to consider when you are in production, in early stages of production, to start thinking about your community engagement plan. What are you going to do? I mean, we actually started our community engagement before the national premiere, and we started well into production, so we were looking ahead. So in my experience, this is an important part of the filmmaking process because, as emerging producers, you are focusing and centering on raising your money to get the story right. But I think in the back of your mind, you also have to think about what are you going to do for engagement, because funders are going to be asking you for that. It's not just having the film and delivering it and here it goes, go ahead and broadcast. They want to see if you really are getting your messages into the community and you're impacting citizenry. So with that said, I just want to go through the engagement plan that we did really quickly for the Brown Buffalo. It was very innovative to this day. And I'm not just saying it because, I worked on the film. I have not yet seen a community engagement plan like this. It was truly a success. And like I said, I really do believe it needs to be a case story. We first hired and worked with a community engagement company to help us onboard 8 different PBS stations nationwide who became our community partners. So each of these 8 different stations received a grant. Okay, it was funded by CPB, but we paid them through our budget. So, so what they did was they produced their own community engagement events, activities, open houses in their own cities. And the activities focused, of course, on the film, Oscar, the issues we explored in the film. And in many cases, the activities and discussions went beyond that to include bringing in Latinx culture to the forefront, which was really great. I mean, these cities were selected based on the historical connection to Oscar and were required to complete their engagement before the premiere. So this was intentional for us in order to help promote the national broadcast. So I want to give you one example, which is KQED TV in San Francisco. They were one of our 8 partners. The station designated April as a month to celebrate the life of Oscar Acosta. And they used that kind of like a vehicle to spotlight Latinx artists whose work focuses on giving a voice to, of course, underrepresented communities and empowering the next generation of young people. So they put on like free neighborhood art crawls that connected, music and entertainment and art activities with kids. KQED also connected the Cesar Chavez parade organizers and had a march to go through the neighborhood. The station held screenings of the film and talked about how Oscar's work is reflective, of the current struggle that their communities are experiencing, like gentrification or cultural consciousness and Latinx pride. So this was just one station out of 8 that organized, all these different activities. And can you imagine what the other 7 did? I mean, my final narrative report to our funders was like this long because it was really fantastic what these stations did to promote not only Oscar and the film, but also really to showcase, our Latinx culture and history. We also commissioned 3 artists to paint 3 murals in 3 different cities in the nation. And this was also intentionally done before the premiere. All the places that we selected, there had to be a connection to Oscar. So like we had a mural go up in El Paso, which was Oscar's hometown. We had another mural go up in Denver, Colorado, which was a place that Oscar frequented a lot. And another in San Antonio, Texas, which is the birthplace of the La Raza party. So these murals brought Oscar to life, through art as a way to bring his, revolutionary soul and sense of social justice back into the collective American mind. The artists received local press in those cities, and in turn, the film and the premiere was promoted. So this element of engagement raised awareness of not just the film and not just of Oscar's story, but really help preserve, our Chicano and Mexican American culture and history. What we also did in the community engagement campaign was we worked on a 10-week social media campaign, which led up to the premiere. So we hired a social media producer who created a ton of Latino-centric social media content that really connected to the relevancy of what was going on in the news that day. For example, there's a lot of press coverage and demonstrations about the Oscars So White back in 2020. I mean, we created innovative posts calling attention to the lack of American Latino representation in front and behind camera in Hollywood. And this was especially close to me, of course, because of my work with the National Hispanic Media Coalition. And then through these social media posts, we also had a call to action, for Angelinos to participate in the National Hispanic Media Coalition's demonstration, against the Academy and the Oscars because of the lack of American Latino representation in Hollywood. So that was a big part of our social media campaign. We also created online book clubs where social media influencers discussed issues related to Acosta's books. And of course, we shared those videos. We created quote cards from Oscar's speeches and turned them into animated graphics. We organized 8 different viewing parties with micro social media influencers sharing our content before and after the premiere. So in exchange of the work that they did for us, we gave them brown buffalo merchandise, a poster of the film, and of course, a DVD of the film. We also activated big social media Latino influencers with hundreds of thousands of followers and millions of followers, such as Rob the Original from Texas, who actually burned an image of Oscar on a tortilla. And that particular video went viral. And it was really wonderful to see on social media and really cool. We used guerrilla tactics also to promote the premiere in our community engagement plan. We hired a marketing truck, which was really cool. We gave the company a very specific route to go along East Los Angeles and surrounding areas, even in mid-Wilshire and West LA, to promote the film. By playing the promo of the film on its side, so you actually saw the moving video. And when the truck stopped, you can hear the audio. And on the back of the truck, we promoted the premiere date to watch tonight. So we also displayed our Instagram handle, on the back of the truck. So that really worked to bring in new viewers. Later on, we found out that really worked, that people saw the truck and actually came in to tune in for their premiere that evening on PBS. Another thing we did was we worked with National Public Radio, NPR, on a major radio campaign. I mean, we aired radio spots on NPR in 16 different cities nationwide. And we reached, because of this campaign, before the broadcast, 1.8 million people. So I know that through that particular campaign, we also brought new eyes to the national broadcast. So why was this engagement or community engagement strategy considered a success? And how did we measure that? Well, first, it was really obvious that we created a movement. I mean, in Latino neighborhoods and communities nationally, we targeted and we cultivated new and younger audiences who tuned in to watch public media, many for the first time, which was incredible. I mean, there was so much content being posted on social media about the film, and that was shared hours before the premiere that the film was actually trending on Google. So, I mean, there were activations about the film and Oscar that were being done literally across the nation that we had nothing to do with. We didn't even know these people. There was one person in Northern California, I think Modesto, who painted his own mural of Oscar and shared it on social media, and that was reshared and reposted. There were posters of Oscar's campaign for sheriff, poster being glued on walls throughout downtown Los Angeles. I mean, there was so much buzz before the premiere. It was really something that I'd never experienced before on a film, nor have I ever seen before in my career. It was really, really super cool. So, since independent producers really need to ensure, that their film is going to be broadcasted by local stations throughout the country, we also felt it really important to hire a station relations person who, focused on getting the film the best exposure and carriage within the PBS system. So she was the point person, who reached out to stations to encourage them to air the film. So when you present your film to PBS, it's not like they press a button and your film is aired nationally at the same time. It doesn't work like that. They provide your film to the various stations throughout the United States, and they decide if in fact they want to air it. So having that station relations person was really critical to encourage these stations to broadcast the film. So according to our station's relations person and the track report that was given to us, the Brown Buffalo film received an overall market coverage of 95.92%, which is really awesome for an independent documentary, with 1,269 airings from various public TV stations in the United States. In terms of streaming, we had close to 15,000 streams within 1 month of the premiere date on pbs.org. And that number actually exceeded the average benchmark for independent docs, which was also really exciting. But really, most importantly, according to Nielsen, 12% of the total Brown Buffalo film audience came from Hispanic households. That was the highest proportion of viewers from this population since the Hispanic Heritage Awards in 2017 on PBS. So we knew we had a hit. We knew everything that we did, not only with the aesthetic of the film and the storyline, but also with our community engagement combined, that we really proved that an unconventional public media documentary with a very youthful sensibility and a very enduring narrative, and whose main character is both Chicano and not well known, can really effectively target and capture new audiences, especially younger Latino audiences, to watch PBS. So that's just one of the success stories, I wanted to share with you. And I hope I provided a little bit of insight and the importance of really thinking about an engagement campaign as a companion, to your film. So I'd like to move on to some producing tips. There's a ton of them, but I just want to go through some that I think is very important and that might be helpful to you. So looking for a good start for archival footage when you research your film, I suggest you watch the credits of the films whose themes and topics explore the similar themes and topics you want to explore in your own film. So these credits will list all the archives and the major TV networks, the libraries, and so forth that the producers used for the visuals. I know this makes sense that you would want to start off there, but even now, 30 years after being in this industry, I've met so many people that just don't think about that. Go to these films and you'll see, if you go to Bradley, you'll see over 50 archives, where we researched. The same thing with the Brown Buffalo film. So think about going to the credits on these films to help give you a good start on your research. If you're working on a historical film, know that in Los Angeles, the local news stations will likely not be helpful in locating footage before 1991. If you recall, in 1991, that was the year when Rodney King, the Black motorist who was pulled over for speeding, was brutally beaten by 4 LAPD officers. And that was caught on film by amateur photographer George Holliday. So up until that beating, The LA news stations didn't save their air checks. They didn't save their live shots, or their newscasts. They were eventually erased, which meant pretty much that they erased our history. And when I found this out, I was surprised, I was shocked, I was disappointed, because I really relied on the local stations to get a lot of the footage, especially for the Bradley film, that we needed. So I knew I had to look elsewhere and find that footage, which I eventually did. But unless the story was somehow digitized, the local news stations might not be of help. So remember, this really only applies for archival footage before the King beating in 1991. But I thought that I would throw it out there because, a lot of emerging filmmakers are very interested in exploring history. And so if you are in Los Angeles, just know that the local news stations may not be that helpful. After 1991, of course, they've gotten to be, better and started building up, libraries. But that's just a head up for footage prior to 1991. So I would definitely establish and maintain good relationships with archivists, librarians, other researchers when you're out in the field, or even on the phone or virtually. Having solid, real, trusted relationships with these gatekeepers, during the course of pre-production and even production is really helpful, because these people will work harder for you if they really like you. I mean, for both films, I became friends, believe it or not, with like a handful of archivists who actually went the distance for me and spent more time than they would with another filmmaker. And they actually found never before seen footage and stills that ended up in both the films just because of the relationships I established with them. They worked hard for me, to try to find something usable. So having those relationships with these archivists is super important during the entire process of filmmaking. There's another hot tip I want to give you, and that has to do with LAPD footage. There is a rather large LAPD collection of old reels, films, and 3/4 that cover the history and activities of the department dating way back from, I think, the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. It is a goldmine of footage of every major event that occurred in Los Angeles, like the Watts riots, public demonstrations, police clashes, interviews, police training videos, LAPD press conferences. They were all shot by the LAPD Press Relations Department. And then they were stored at the LA City Archives for years. They were just sitting there, rotting away, undigitized, and no filmmaker knew about it. And I was the first one that discovered this archive by chance, just because the archivist at the City Archives, Michael Holland, became a good friend of mine, and we were just talking. I remember being there, at the archive and just bullshitting with him and talking to him about some of the problems of footage that I couldn't find. And he says, "Wait a second, we have a collection right down there, and it's never been tapped into. I don't even know what's on those reels." And I was stunned. My mouth dropped to the ground. I said, I can't believe it. So what we did was we pleaded with former LAPD PD Chief Bernard Parks. He was in our film, in the Bradley film, and he also gave us money for production. So he was a big supporter. And we said, "Listen, you got to help us gain access to this collection." So he made calls, and the LAPD 2 days later allowed us to go into that collection only for 2 days, but transfer whatever we wanted. So we had to be very selective because, oftentimes these reels only had just like 2 or 3 words to describe the reel, and transferring this footage was hundreds and hundreds of dollars, so, but what we ended up transferring, we used the film and became critical in telling our story. So since then, we've worked with Michael Holland and the City Archives to raise more money to continue to digitize these reels for filmmakers like yourself, because they don't just have to do with, the LAPD. They are a really wonderful archive of the history of Los Angeles. So if you're looking for images like that, you got to tap into this extraordinary collection. It's super fascinating, and I still run into producers today that have never even heard about it. So I just wanted to give you that hot tip. Writing a script. Victor, if you don't mind just pulling up the PDF for the producers to see. So, writing a script, everybody does it differently. I thought I'd show you one of mine so that you can get an idea as how one filmmaker writes it. So let me see. Have you pulled that up yet, Victor? Okay, there it is. All right, thank you so much. Okay, so as you can see, I write it in 2 columns. The one on the left contains time code and description of the B-roll shots, including music cues, fade in and out cues, etc. And then the column to the right, that's where I place all the narration and the interview sound bites. So that really helps me organize. This was a short film. It was probably about 15 to 20 minutes, but this helped me organize and write this particular script. And it's so helpful for the editor to be so organized when you're walking in with a script like this in time codes. And it also helps me visualize the film when I go through it. So that's just one idea of writing a script, but I just wanted to throw it out there to see, if you could use it in any way. Interviewing, of course, you don't want to forget the basics, which is who, what, when, where, why. But I think really the biggest tip that I can give you when you're interviewing a subject is listen, and continue to listen. I come prepared with pages of questions for each person I interview, but I hardly look down at my questions during the course of the interview. I make sure I tell myself in my head before I sit down with the subject that this is not an interview. It's not. That this is a conversation. So if I already set that up in the mind that this is a conversation, I keep myself really focused on listening to them, and I get the cues as what are the best questions to follow up with. And I find that one of the best questions to ask anyone that you're interviewing is, about their feelings, about their emotions. How did that make you feel? Or how do you feel about that? I think you can really get to the soul of the answer, and the person, and maybe even the story by asking that. And then really just to network. I mean, become a member of organizations that have experience with like pipeline development, with mentorship, with training, especially for people of color, like NALEP, the National Association of Latino Independent Producers. At one point, I also worked for them too. They are an awesome organization that can help you and guide, your project from the beginning to the end. I would definitely become a member, or at least follow them and sign up for their e-newsletter, so when the next workshop is. If you're more news oriented, become a member of the California Chicano News Media Association. I mean, that's what I did, back in 1989, before I began my work at KCET, and I just networked. And when you meet that person refers you to another person, and so forth and so forth. So networking is a big part of this industry. And also you want to be able to, maintain all of these relationships, because you might need these people later on, for your film. Questions, mentorship, help with funding. I mean, whatever it is, to create that close-knit community of filmmakers and surround yourself with that talent and that love and that vibe is super important for the emotional and professional growth for you as a producer. And some of the lessons that I've learned as a producer that I want to talk to you about is that, and I focus a lot on public media, but PBS really prefers 1 hour documentaries instead of 1.5 to 2 hours. I mean, I know even now, I mean, I just was mentoring a Asian American producer who's a pharmacist, but is working on her first film on the side. And, she says, oh, this is a great documentary. I love the idea. I want it to be 1.5 hours. I said, okay, so where do you want it to be? Oh, PBS. Well, it's easier for executives to schedule a 1 hour documentary during their time slots for documentaries versus a 1.5 hour. I mean, if you were Ken Burns, that's a different story. But as independent filmmakers, it's really important to know that you have more of a chance to get your film in if it was a 1 hour doc, which for PBS terms, it's like 56-40 seconds, but that's basically the 1 hour doc. So, I mean, and that actually happened to me with the Bradley film. I mean, Lynn, my co-producer partner, her and I really wanted the Bradley film to be 1.5 hours. There's so much we had to cut out in that half an hour because we decided in the end that, hey, it's going to be a stronger story and a more appealing story if we did cut it out. I mean, we were just so close to it that in the end we did cut it out and it became a better story. So just something to think about if in fact you are headed in that direction. Another lesson learned as a producer, especially after the Brown Buffalo film, was hiring social media influencers and activators really do help expand the outreach to new audiences nationwide. And, cultivating culturally relevant content can still engage and can sustain your film fans post-premiere, on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. So you don't have to completely stop your engagement just because your premiere ended. I mean, we've actually continued, Philip and I, reposting and resharing and trying to make people remember, the good things that came out of the film, the themes, the story of Oscar, why it's important in the story of Los Angeles and the Chicano movement and politics and race and identity and so forth. And so, we still do social media campaigns. I mean, they're not like extensive, but we do, so, and this has been, let's see, the premiere was in March of 2018. So we've been doing it. So just something to think about. You can still engage, your fans of the film and still keep it living, for a while, well after the premiere. And we also learned that initiating that, really innovative grassroots guerrilla marketing campaign for engagement, can also bring in new audiences and new press. And then attaching star power. I mean, this is just, of course, right? Helps connect new fans and audiences to public media. So it took me, I don't know, over a year and a lot of stress and a lot of sleepless nights to try to get Academy Award winning actor Benicio del Toro as executive producer of the Brown Buffalo film. As you know, he portrayed Oscar in the movie Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. And that's a whole other story how I got him. But he ended up becoming executive producer like at the very last moment, before the contract needed to be signed and all of that. So that having him attached to the film, oh my God, that provided us additional publicity, including Variety. So lastly, I'd like to talk about the importance of public affairs videos and PSAs in making an impact online, especially like Victor said earlier on, in light of the California gubernatorial recall election, which is only a few weeks away. So in 2020, during the COVID-19 pandemic, filmmakers and so many other artists, event producers, creators, et cetera, they had to pivot and produce content virtually. We all had to kind of adjust and think of working in a very different manner, right? Because we were all at home. And so Philip is again, the director of the Brown Buffalo film. He and I came together to work on several projects during COVID, but one of them included journalist and author of the extraordinary book Unforgetting, Roberto Lovato. And our goal as a trio was to produce a series of short public affairs testimonials really shot on phones and edited by us and distributed online, which focused on destroying and defeating Trump's 2020 election campaign. And so we called it hashtag Todos contra Trump. So we got together and we just felt we needed to inject urgency and really radical spirit, into the campaign, into this campaign, in order to achieve our goal, which was to help Latino voters realize, both in English and in Spanish, the grave threat of another Trump term. So we looked for people and stories and messages that were impactful to move Latino voters to action, and people who weren't afraid to relentlessly attack Trump. We found educators, activists, immigrants, thinkers. We looked for poets, people of that nature, people who were able to portray the fury and the intensity and the resolve, the terror and the chaos Trump has been slinging upon our community for many years. So with that in mind, and these were very short testimonials, about 30 seconds each. With that in mind, I just want Victor, if you can, to run the first testimonial by a Latina activist and LA actress Anahi Bustios.
I'm going to be honest with you. I don't want to vote for Biden. I still believe that he is a part of the system that has gotten us to where we are today. I'm voting for Biden because the president that we currently have is leading us further away from a democracy and into fascism by the removal of civil rights and the breaking of laws. I'm voting for Biden.
Great. Thank you. So since it was just the three of us, we really didn't have time to raise funds. I mean, we just did this all in our own time. We wish we would have had the time and the effort to raise enough money to make it a massive online campaign. But, we did what we could do, at the moment. And there was really no way for us to really measure with statistics the real impact that our campaign had on people. But we did see the impact that these videos had online by the number of shares of the content, the number of likes, and the number of people who really stopped and watched the videos and commented about them, whether they were good or bad about Trump. We really got people out there engaged. Latinos were engaged. We were so excited that we were doing just something different, that as filmmakers, we just couldn't sit by and let Trump do his thing. We had to fight back. And this is one of the things that we decided to do. We did it on our own. We did it quickly. It was meaningful. It was thoughtful. And I think we made a difference. Here's another testimonial from Joe Conzo, who lives in the Bronx. Victor, if you don't mind rolling that clip.
This is my mother. Her life was taken in Puerto Rico. I blame you for her death because of your lack of empathy, your lack of response, your lack of caring. I blame you for my mother's death. Lorraine Montenegro from the Bronx.
So these types of videos are exactly what anyone can do now, focusing on the California gubernatorial recall election. I truly believe that online campaign of public affairs videos like these can make a difference. And the point is that they don't have to be done by filmmakers. They can be done by anyone, with a desire and a phone, to mobilize and spread that important message. All you need to do is bring on board like-minded people like you to help and engage California voters, engage Latino voters to use their power to vote. I mean, the lesson learned in this particular kind of innovative campaign is that no matter how small your project is, If it really moves people, if it's meaningful, if it's thoughtful, if it connects to the hearts and the minds of people, you're helping to raise awareness of important issues. You're helping to make change. You're getting people to respond to your call of action, like voting. You can make an impact by yourself with the help of just your phone. You can present your own content without having to raise any money. I mean, that's the good thing. You don't have to raise any money and you can make that change. Just don't give up. Just don't be afraid. Be unapologetic, be resilient, be you. You as our future filmmakers can and will be change makers. You can do it. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be speaking with you today.
Thank you, Allison. That was incredibly inspirational and informative. And I know that there's people taking notes in the conversation about what they can do to be more active. And I think that, some of the key words that you mentioned in your success, which we've been talking about in the class, are the importance of relationships. When you look at the tools that a creative person has, a producer doesn't necessarily need to have a camera or know how to use a camera or to be able to act or edit, but those relationships that you build over time are what make you excel. They're the art form of the producer, and to be able to find new archives, to find things that everyone else has been looking for that didn't exist, like you were talking about the photos of Socorro.
Yeah.
That's through relationships and conversations.
That's right. Because the producer is really the primary point of contact for all the positions between the cast and the crew, and and they're the lead person. It's the director on the set, but the producer is putting all the elements together. I mean, like for both my films, I controlled every aspect of the research, the production, and the post-production on a day-to-day basis, including developing the story. And I know nothing about equipment. I know nothing about cameras. I've never shot anything in my life. But I can tell you, I'm a badass producer if I want to be, and if I want to get something done, I will get it done. And that's the type of attitude that you need to have on set. But you have to also be able to balance that out, and be kind, be compassionate. You have to have a personality where you're going to be the one that's going to break up arguments, where you're going to want to move, the film and the production forward, because that's what producers do. Everybody will turn to the producer, not necessarily the director. This has been my experience. They turn to me, and if I had questions, then I'd pick up the phone and call the director, and then we'd discuss it and go from there. But I mean, the producer is a very key part of filmmaking, and having that personality to be able to deal with all types of personalities is really important, and it takes a very special person to do it.
Yes, and we were talking earlier before this conversation about the importance of a producer, that you could have a great director, a great writer, a great narrator lined up, but the producer is the one that really is one of those conversations that gives the money people the confidence that it's going to come in, it's going to be done. And with documentary, when you're talking about PBS, it's very legal. It's all about the facts and the contracts and the release forms. So the producer is the one that all that is on. Now, when we're talking about this new social media age, where you're looking at no budget or low budget production, where there is a wealth of video footage online, from all over the world. Anytime there's an incident, there's a tsunami, there's thousands of videos that come out immediately that you can draw from as a visual storyteller. We have to remember what you were saying, that when we're looking at the past, these didn't necessarily exist for a number of reasons. One, because they weren't valued, but also because it didn't serve the dominant society to save them. I worked on the documentary on the U.S.-Mexican War, and we're celebrating the 175th anniversary of that war. And when we were making the documentary, we had to go to these archives because they were source material. It was lithographs and photography was just in an infancy, so it was just single images. Now it's easier where you can find these things digitized. Library of Congress has a bigger online archive, but there really wasn't a desire to maintain these or make them available. And so I remember the screening of the Brown Buffalo film. There were people in the audience, it was packed, but there were people in the audience who had lived this experience, who had known Oscar Acosta. There were relatives of Socorro were there, who had never seen this, who had waited, 50 years or whatever it was to tell this story, to see it told. And it was so emotional for them. But then there was a new generation that had read about him, and it was new to them. But to see those two people come together, those two populations, and be unified by this film was very powerful.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's all very true. Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to open up to questions. I have a question myself before we start.
Okay.
So you gave a lot of great tips, and I think you closed on some of the things that I was going to ask about. But as people go into producing, say around the recall that we're talking about, or issues that are in their community, what are some tips that will stand out for you in your years of producing to make something impactful and memorable, and to create change? Like, what would you say? Oh, don't forget to do this.
Yeah, that's a good question. I in doing that Todos Contra Trump campaign, it was really important for all of us to find different perspectives, different voices, all within the Latino community, of course, but voices that were able to portray that fury that our community had against Trump, and his re-election campaign. And, in doing so, we wanted to find those moving stories. It was all about, kind of touching, like I mentioned before, the hearts and the minds of people, because I think if you do that and you tap into that, people are going to be more susceptible to listen, more ready to respond to your call of action. And also just focusing on human stories, I think was really important in this campaign, to be able to have Joe Conzo say straight out, my mother was disrespected, and I blame you for everything that has happened to her, Trump. It strikes a chord in you. I mean, these are real people with real stories. They're human stories. And I think that those are the things that I especially as a producer am attracted to. But I think that also just generally, just because we are the human species, want to see that, and need to hear that. There was another testimonial that I didn't show here of Kirsten Aquiza. And she's now the president of a big movement that's called Marked by COVID. And her father got COVID because he listened to Trump and didn't think that it was going to be a virus that he could, contract. And he did, and he died. And there was much discussion between herself and the rest of the family. But, they truly believe that, it was Trump that killed her father. And telling these real human interest stories engages people, in a way that I don't think any other type of story can.
Yeah, and I think there's great advice. And I think that as we look at conservative media, we've been talking in the class about the importance of intellectual resonance, but also emotional resonance. And making short form videos, emotional sometimes takes over. And so if you don't have that emotional resonance, and they rely only on that, like the knee jerk, the button push, and they have zero intellectual resonance. But don't forget that. So we're going to open it up to questions now. I'm going to take a look at you. If you'll all turn on your cameras so we can see you, and raise your hand to have a question. I know that Isaac Artenstein and Lupe Montiel and Fernando had already commented in the post, but if you want to say something directly, please raise your hand and I will call on you and you can unmute yourself. And you go to the place where it says reactions and you can smile and do the raise your hands right there.
Mm-hmm.
Or just raise your hand physically.
It's so nice to see all of your faces today. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello. First of all, thank you so much for your time.
Sandra.
I learned so much, and I think this is really valuable for me as someone who's just starting off in my career post-college and trying to kind of, think about different possible paths. And I think the hard thing is for me, I've been in an environment where kind of a certain path is laid out. Certain jobs are kind of highlighted, and there weren't a lot of, I guess, opportunities in college where they presented alternative paths. So trying to forge something different is scary. And I'd like to ask you, we've kind of touched on this a little bit, and I've gotten a little bit of a sense of this, but what do you think are the essential qualities that make a good producer? And what do you think really makes a good producer stand out?
Oh my goodness. What a what a loaded question, but a very, very good one. Let me think about this for a second. Okay. So after working with so many different types of people, I think the best answer to that question is really coming from the people that I have worked with that tell me what I'm like to work on a project. And one of the big things that directors and other producers have told me is really about, my strengths is my personality. Is I'm, going into a project in a very honest, truthful way. I'm not trying to fake to be somebody. I'm not trying to be anybody. I'm trying to be myself. If I'm doing an interview with somebody, who was abused, for example, in the foster care system, I'm going to sit and I'm going to really listen, and I may show some emotion on my face during the course of the interview, but it's true emotion. I'm not going to, keep that in. I want to be able to connect with that person. But I have a really good way of dealing with people and negotiating with people. And I think it just came from the way I was brought up. I have a very humble father and mother. I believe, in my history and telling, our Chicano and Mexican American Latinx history. So anything that has to, do with that, I am, I pay attention to, but I pay attention to in a way where, I want to be able to show that, I'm just a normal person. I'm not just a producer behind a camera, or I'm somebody to be fearful of because I'm afraid, you're going to ask me a certain question. I just have this ability, and I'm, again, I think it just goes back to, being, raised this way, to deal with people well, to approach funders, and maintain relationships with them, maintain relationships with interviewees, with production crew members, with actors, with directors, with fellow producers. And I think it has a lot to do with just respect, and just not trying to, I've been the person never to want to be in the limelight. The producing part of it is really more kind of my personality, but, I treat people with kindness and compassion, and, when there's a big problem, on set, or a big production problem, or some shit is coming down, it's going to hit the fan, and I know I'm going to have to deal with it. I take a deep breath. Okay, what's the best way? How is the best way I should deal with this? What is the strategy and talking to this person? What's the tone? What exactly am I going to say? If this person says this, I better be ready to say B, so I'm already thinking ahead. So when that conversation comes, it just comes out naturally. it comes out honestly and truthfully. And in the end, and I'm telling you, most of the time I really get what I want. There's very few times in my 30 years that I have not gotten what I wanted. And that's because I really feel it's this, kindness, and compassion and trust that I emote, that allows people to say, okay, let's do it. Let's work with her, or let's give her the money, or let's give her the soundbite she needs, or let's give her those visuals. Because, you are our future filmmakers, our future storytellers. We need you out there to tell our stories. There's not enough of us. And to see the Latinas here too is just an inspiration to me, because, there's just not a lot of people really that look like me doing what I'm doing on the PBS level. So when I see all of you, it just gives me hope for the next generation, that I just want to say thank you and applaud all of you for stepping into this crazy business. But it's going to be a great journey, a fun journey, an exciting one, but one where you will be a change maker. And you'll die a happy woman and a happy man because you made change.
Thank you.
I can't think of a better way to conclude the conversation. That's so inspirational. And as somebody who comes from the same era of starting out when Allison started, we can't stress enough that these opportunities did not exist at your age, and that those doors are open. We need to really make use of them and be ready for them. And we're at a time where the industry is recognizing for the first time its own discrimination and exclusion, and its federal mandates now to diversify. So we have to be there and work with those organizations, tell the stories, start with whatever you have, with no budget filmmaking, with you have access to the world through social media, and we have historical moments that need our perspective to tell, so that the next generation can see our footage and not not experience what Allison was talking about, where this just didn't exist. So we have a piece of history that we can bring forward. So I want to thank you all for coming again. Very excited at today's presentation with Alison Sotomayor. Again, the two films that she talked about, Bridging the Divide, Tom Bradley and the Politics of Race, and The Rise and Fall of the Brown Buffalo about Oscar Zeta Acosta are available on Kanopy for free. And there's a lot of other great things that you can watch on there, documentaries, foreign films, classics, silent films. It's free with your library card. So we're really pushing Kanopy. Our next Millennial Producers Academy for ages 13 to 17 starts on September 4th. And you can sign up at masamedia.org. And the OC Film Fiesta 12th anniversary or 12th year, October 14th through 24th will be virtual and in person. So you can find more information at ocfilmfiesta.org. I want to thank you, Allison, for participating, and thank you all for being part of this presentation and class, and for your questions from New York and San Antonio and California. Let's make a difference. Let's take this information and skills and get inspired and make those films and be the producers that no one is stopping you from becoming.
Woo.
Thank you, everybody.